Not many films can lay claim to being one of the best action movies of all time, but also one of the best Christmas movies of all time.
Merry Christmas.
And that's an accolade that I think few can deny that Die Hard has achieved. The timeless movie about a guy getting stuck in a high-rise building on Christmas Eve at his wife's Christmas party, the same night it's under attack by European terrorists, and then having to use his wits and limited resources to stop them from pulling off a multi-million-dollar heist, all the while not even being able to get a pair of shoes that fit. Watching this movie has become as much of an annual tradition for me as paying my taxes is, or making fun of flat earthers, and throughout the years it's another film series that got the video game adaptation treatment. Some obviously being better than others, and there being four in particular that I'm going to talk about today. Those being Die Hard Trilogy 1 and 2, Nakatomi Plaza, and then finally Die Hard Vendetta.
Hold tight, this is gonna get bumpy!
So as John McClane himself would say, yippee-ki-yak mother buckets, let's get into it.
Welcome to the party, pal!
Now, although Die Hard Trilogy was also released for the PC, I still consider this one to be a PS1 game, and it was one of those games it seemed that everyone had a copy of back in the day. This is also the only game in this list to ever get that much coveted platinum status, and when you put in a Sony game and saw that platinum cover, well, you knew you were in for something pretty special.
Yippee-ki-yay!
What you get with Die Hard Trilogy is essentially 3 games in one, each based off the first 3 films in the series, with Die Hard being a third-person shooter, Die Harder being an on-rails light gun shooter, and then Die Hard with a Vengeance being a driving sim. All featuring some pretty funny voice acting, with the main voice actor doing a really bad impression of Bruce Willis that often sounds more like he's doing Louis Guzman.
Supposed to stay in your seats until the plane reaches the terminal.
Now for Die Hard, the premise should be pretty obvious. You're playing as John McClane, fighting back against Hans Gruber's mercenaries on the various floors of the Nakatomi building. Starting in the parking lot, then just working your way up, killing terrorists and rescuing hostages along the way.
Trail.
Once you've killed a certain amount of bad guys in each floor, a bomb gets set off on an elevator, then you've got 30 seconds to find and disarm it, which then carries you to the next level.
Yippee-ki-yay!
And yeah, they have tried to make the whole thing feel pretty accurate to the movie. They've even included that zigzaggy table from the film that McClane has to crawl under.
No more table! Where are you going, pal?
For the bonus stages, you're on the rooftop, which again looks familiar, having to SQ hostages to a chopper to then net additional points, which adds in a small amount of variety. So overall, it's a pretty solid little gameplay loop. I mean, it's nothing amazing, but you know, it is acceptable considering this game came out back in 1996. You'll hear John saying the same lines of dialogue over and over, most of which are just quotes thrown in from the movie.
Ho ho ho! I've got a machine gun!
Plus, you'll also hear the countless death rattles from the dozens of terrorists that you gun down here. Honestly, I think you kill more terrorists in the first 10 seconds of the first level than John has ever killed in the entire film series. It's always been kind of funny to me too, considering John kills like, what, 10 people in that entire movie? And yet every video game adaptation has him just committing bad guy genocide. Aside from John's Beretta pistol, which thankfully has unlimited ammo, you can salvage other weapons from crates like an MP5, a Steyr AUG, and a light machine gun. All of which, again, were weapons from the movie. But these all only have like 1 or 2 spare magazines, so you're going to be using that pistol most of the time. There's also grenades and flashbangs, but I found that I didn't really use these often, mostly because John throws them like a Girl Scout with a sprained wrist.
Bye bye, bad guy!
It is kind of funny looking back on this thing, considering how dated it's become now in 2023, because I do remember watching my friend play this back in the day, and just both of us being absolutely gobsmacked with how good the whole thing looked. Yes, our gobs were smacked.
I must have missed 60 minutes. What are you saying?
Even the basic things like being able to shoot out all the windows and even destroy walls that got in your way. It was this level of destructibility that you just didn't see in many of the video games at the time. Plus, it was also pretty damn challenging. You only start off with 3 lives, and I only managed to get a single extra life in my entire playthrough. You can heal up with medkits or by eating food, and body armor does provide a bit more protection, but once those lives are gone, that's it. You can get by pretty easily though by just shooting enemies from a distance, often before they're even able to see you, and I found too that I often ended up playing this just like John McClane would, running away if I got ambushed by too many bad guys, so that I could be back to live free and die hard another day.
Shut up!
The mode's biggest downfall though, I think, is that it just becomes really repetitive, and it feels more like an arcade game more than one made for home consoles. That gameplay loop is really just run around, shoot a bad guy, rescue hostages, and then repeat. You also have to revisit the same floors multiple times, so you also get a bit of deja vu as you're cleaning house in the same looking locations.
Great!
I don't really know why they felt the need to drag this thing out for so long. I mean, it's probably the longest game out of all these three, and I feel like it could have been half the length and still been fine, considering that there's still 2 other game modes to play through. Just means you'll probably have to come back a few times to get through the whole thing, and hopefully you've got a memory card, because otherwise, you've got to sit through what has to be one of the worst password systems I've ever seen. I mean, look at this thing, right? 13 across and 4 down with inputs like exclamation marks and underscores. If this was some kind of subtle way that Sony were trying to encourage people to buy memory cards over using this password system, just by being so time consuming and annoying, well, gotta say they make a pretty compelling argument. Still though, for what it is, it's fun enough. And seeing those familiar looking locations from the movie and hearing John repeat those iconic lines of dialogue from the movie really doesn't ever get old.
Want to stay alive? Stay with me.
Next up, there's Die Harder, based off the second film, where John has the worst airport experience someone could ever have, minus getting a cavity search during check-in from a security worker that's got leprosy. Again too, the charm of hearing that voice actor trying to do his darndest to sound like Bruce Willis as he recites dialogue from the movie is definitely a highlight.
Yippee-ki-yay!
Now this game mode is a light gun shooter, at least, assuming you've got the right peripheral. In fact, this is actually one of the few games for the PlayStation requiring the use of Konami's Hyper Blaster, something that's about as rare as photos of your mum with her clothes on.
Sorry, pal.
Failing that, you can also use the DualShock controller, which is about as accurate as trying to dice vegetables with garden shears, or if you've got it, the PlayStation mouse, which I think is the second best thing to a light gun. A lot of people probably don't know this too, but the PlayStation actually had some really good light gun titles. You had Time Crisis, the Point Blank series, plus a really good port of Lethal Enforcers. And amongst all of those heavyweights, I do think that Hard Trilogy really stacks up. If nothing else, just for the sheer amount of carnage that you get to cause here, with things blowing up constantly and almost every single element in the game world reacting when you shoot it. It's a well-known fact too that all of the best video game levels are set in airports. Yeah, that's right, all of them.
Holy shit!
This one again follows the movie's plot pretty closely, with John trying to stop the attack at the airport by Colonel Stewart and his men, whose numbers have again been grossly exaggerated here for the sake of more exciting gameplay. You start off inside the airport terminal, then there's a level set in the tunnels beneath the airport, another later on with a snowmobile chase, and then the final level is set in the air as you're shooting down the plane that the soldiers are trying to escape in. So visually, it is a hell of a lot different to that first game mode, which is a good thing because that mode started to get mighty samey near the end there. Your basic weapon is again John's Beretta pistol, but you can pick up a wide variety of other weapons along the way too. Again, automatic weapons like the MP5 and the Steyr, but then also shotguns and particularly an explosive shotgun. Though despite its namesake suggesting otherwise, this thing ain't very fun to use. I mean, if anything, I think it's a bit of a handicap.
Thanks for the advice.
Though I will say that I do appreciate how shooting enemies with the basic shotgun's often going to turn them into red mist. And maybe it's part of my fondness for light gun shooters because, truth be told, I am a bit of a simp for that genre, but I gotta say that I think I found this mode to be the most fun. If only for the fact that it's playable from start to finish in a single sitting, and it just never felt like it got boring to me. I mean, there is a bunch of horseshit difficulty spikes here and there, but it's a mostly balanced experience that just relies on good reflexes. Oh yeah, and thank God you're not penalised for shooting innocent people here because I wouldn't make it past the first level. Yeah, it is a major disaster. It gives me some serious flashbacks to playing through Virtua Cop with the amount of civilians that I accidentally shoot throughout the course of my rampage.
Help me!
And speaking of Virtua Cop, it's a good thing that they didn't go the same route there of taking away a health point every time you accidentally kill a civilian. You start off with 5 hit points and thankfully you can replenish these pretty often, but again like the first game mode, when these are gone, it's game over. You lose, good day sir. So unless you've saved your game at the beginning of that level or want to spend 15 minutes punching in the fucking Da Vinci Code, well, you're going to be thrown back to the beginning. And I gotta say, I just don't understand why they didn't include some kind of basic continue option. I mean, considering this thing's heavy and obvious arcade influences. Otherwise, I don't really have too much else to say about this one. I mean, it's really just as simple as aiming and shooting for the 45 or so minutes that the whole thing lasts. Sadly, it brings me no pleasure to say that they've definitely saved the worst for last here with Die Hard with a Vengeance. Yes, this one is based off the movie. If the movie had have just been Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson driving around New York City defusing bombs for 2 hours.
Yeah, eat this!
Right, so this is a PS1 era driving game, which is fine. The platform had plenty of them, some of which controlled and played really good. However, this isn't one of those instances.
Bad idea.
And that's going to be apparent with the absolutely god-awful vehicle handling and the collision physics, which, for a driving game, I'm sure you can agree is a pretty big issue.
Try not to do that again.
This entire mode takes the premise from like the first act of the film, where McClane's been given that task by Simon Gruber to drive around various areas of New York City to find and defuse a couple of dozen bombs.
Excuse me! Excuse me!
Right from the get-go, you're inside a cab and tasked with finding your first bomb, the only indication to its whereabouts being this little arrow you've got on the bottom of the screen. Seemingly, you can choose your own path to get there, but that's the first problem this mode has. Because while the city is pretty large and open, you've really got to go down whatever specific route the game's intended. Every bomb's got a time limit too, so if you don't take the fastest possible route, of which there really is usually only one, well then that bomb's gonna go off and you lose a life, starting back from the beginning of the current bomb. And yes, again, once all those 3 lives are gone, it's game over. Ideal routes are usually littered with pickups to drive through, which give extra time, extra points, or can even summon an ambulance to drive in front of you, clearing oncoming traffic. One pickup even launches you up into the air, which is useful for clearing gridlocked intersections, and the way your car flies off into the air there makes me feel like I'm watching the Blues Brothers. The problem though is that these later levels really just do become outright trial and error, where you're really forced to learn which path is the most efficient, under that incredibly strict condition of only ever having 3 available lives.
We're gonna die!
The worst area by far is the one in Central Park, because this entire place is packed with lakes and puddles that instantly total the taxi if you drive into them.
No!
Bombs are either going to be stationary and you just need to locate them, but if they're not, then they'll be bomb cars, which you're going to need to ram repeatedly to destroy them, and these right here are the fucking worst. Because their movements are so erratic that you almost have to know what the next turn is going to be so you can head them off.
Someone give me some answers.
Yeah, and I love too how every bomb's always magically able to outdrive the player. Like this thing here's a giant hot dog cart, and you're telling me that this thing can somehow outrun a taxi. I mean, give me a break. Once you've done this like a dozen or so times per area, Simon directs you to the exit and then you move on to the next one.
I see you and this Samaritan have qualified for another lap, McLean.
Then you've got these awful intermission challenges where you need to beat a dump truck to one final bomb inside a subway tunnel, a truck which always manages to catch up to you or pull off ahead.
I take it both you and your friend are enjoying the game.
Shut up!
Now, I do appreciate that they tried to make this mode different from the other two, but man, this just starts to get really crappy, and it doesn't help that you're again revisiting the same sections of the city over and over. I don't know, I just can't get past how awful these cars are to drive. Everything just handles so horribly, and colliding with other cars, which is frequent, shows off these reality-defying physics, where cars seem to almost attach themselves to your bonnet. And if you somehow make a wrong turn and head down a gridlocked street, well, you may as well just wait for that bomb to explode, because by that point, you've got bugger all chance to catch up to it. This game came out a few years before Grand Theft Auto 3, a game which really showed us what collision physics when driving cars should really look like. So trying to plow through vehicles like you would in a game like that just doesn't quite have the same effect here. It also often feels like you're committing mass murder here, plowing through innocent people almost constantly.
Are you aiming for these people? No. Maybe that mine.
What's even funnier is that if you go into dashboard view, McClane turns on the windscreen wiper to wash away all that blood. Now, I have to admit, that's pretty funny. Often too, when you detonate these bombs, you'll often see nearby civilians caught in the blast and just roasted like a fucking marshmallow. If I'll praise one thing though, I do have to admit that visually the game does look pretty good. I mean, for a game from 1996, it's kinda hard to fault. They even managed to work in that fake sky reflection effect on the windows. One of my favourite driving games at the time was a game called Auto Destruct, which came out 2 years after Die Hard Trilogy did, and I mean, look at that thing in comparison, despite a 2-year advancement. Still though, I think this is hands down the worst one out of all three here, and that's doubly disappointing considering how awesome that third movie was.
Say hello to your brother.
I would honestly say that Die Hard with a Vengeance is a better movie than the first one. It's definitely on a much grander scale with the backdrop of all of New York City as opposed to just a corporate building at Los Angeles. Simon Gruber is also a really awesome and highly intelligent antagonist. McClane also has another character to bounce off more frequently with Zeus being around all the time, and the banter back and forth between these guys is really entertaining.
I don't like you because you're gonna get me killed!
Plus the action scenes and the stunts are just incredible. So, I kind of feel like a game based off that movie just deserved better. Sure deserved more than just making you drive taxis around and chase after explosive hot dog carts. Now, it wasn't until the year 2000, right around the same time when electronic devices worldwide exploded due to the Y2K bug, that we got a follow-up with Die Hard Trilogy 2, Viva Las Vegas. It's actually kind of a shame that the Y2K bug didn't affect this theme because it would have saved us all the aggravation of having to play through it, and to experience just how bad a sequel could possibly be. The best way I describe Die Hard Trilogy 2 is, imagine if Siphon Filter was made by a group of lobotomized monkeys. Because unlike the first game, which was a pretty good combination of 3 different game modes, this combines all those modes into one campaign, but it somehow manages to do it worse in almost every single regard.
Oh yeah!
This is one of those rare times I've played a game for this channel where I really started to question if doing these kind of videos was really what I wanted to be doing with my life, and I've never been so happy to see the ending of a game before. The story opens with John passed out on his couch, getting a call from an old NYPD buddy named Kenny, who's now been promoted to warden of a maximum security prison near Las Vegas, because apparently that's a career path.
I'm the new warden at the Mesa Grande prison here in Vegas.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be too much of a surprise too that Kenny turns out to be one of the bad guys. Anyway, McClane heads to the prison for Kenny's celebration party just as a prison riot begins.
We've got inmates loose and they're rioting.
Then, as he's trying to escape, he gets caught up in a plot involving a terrorist group who are trying to detonate a bunch of explosives around Las Vegas. I think.
Why does this always happen to me?
And the reason I say that is because I didn't really follow what was going on. Mostly because all you get in the way of story between each level is like a very short cinematic where the sound mixing is so bad you often can't even hear what anyone's saying. For some reason too, in every cinematic, it always looks like someone's standing underneath a giant spotlight, like there's only one light source in that entire room and it's aimed at the top of everyone's heads. Despite the game being called Viva Las Vegas, you won't even step foot in a casino until you're about 2/3 into the game, assuming of course you last that long. Like the first game, the levels are broken down into 3 modes, either a crappy third-person shooter, a crappy on-rails shooter, or a crappy driving sim. You start off inside the prison in third-person mode, having to make your way through the complex, shooting, attacking inmates, but also corrupt prison guards. Later levels often add a time limit to this mode to really get that asshole puckering, and occasionally you have to also rescue hostages, but it's more or less just run around and shoot people, activating switches every now and then to get through locked doors. When I first started playing this too, it really reminded me of how the movement controls felt in that Duke Nukem Land of the Babes game, and you know what, lo and behold, the guys who worked on this and Space also developed Land of the Babes.
Hail to the king, baby.
Not content enough with ruining the Duke Nukem franchise, I guess they thought they'd try their hand at ruining this one too.
Alright!
One of the main things that really chafed my willy was when I noticed how the UI didn't tell me how many bullets I had left in my pistol magazine, along with the fact that I also couldn't manually reload either, which for a third-person shooter from the year 2000 is complete bollocks. There's a first-person aiming mode, which outside of a handful of instances where the auto-aim doesn't lock on, is completely pointless. So overall, not really what you'd expect or hope for a game that's supposed to improve upon its predecessor. And I think even the controls back in 1996 were better than this.
I will break you!
After that opening level set in the prison, you're then into the first of the many on-rails levels, where you just move down this preset path shooting at enemies who routinely pop out from behind cover. Again, like the first game, ideally you want to be using a light gun, but again, I was able to get by pretty well here with the PlayStation mouse. This mode does get a lot harder the further you get into the story though, because someone really got the memo that this is supposed to replicate that arcade game difficulty. And yeah, these kind of light gun shooters in the arcades were often super hard, but the difference is that in the arcades, if you died, you could just chuck in some more money and pick up right from where you left off. Here though, if you die, you've got to restart the entire level.
Bullshit!
And sometimes death comes really quickly. Like this bit right here, right? Like what actually killed me?
Bullshit!
You want to know what it was? Apparently that little thing there is supposed to be some kind of bomb. And yeah, good luck spotting that thing on your first playthrough. Once you make it out of the prison, you've got the first driving stage, and you'll quickly see too just how awful this mode is. Like the first game, you've got to destroy bombs along with enemy vehicles. However, you're not really driving James Bond's Aston Martin or anything. That is to say, this thing isn't kitted out with machine guns, caltrops, or condom dispensers. So your only method for destroying enemy vehicles is ramming into them, over and over. And that might be fine, but the vehicles handle even worse than the first game. There's what I guess is supposed to be a handbrake turn, but the amount this makes your car rotate is just laughable. The big new addition they came up with for this mode is that for a single mission, you have to dispose of bombs instead of blowing them up in those densely populated areas. This involves driving around and picking them up in a dump truck and then dropping them off at a bomb disposal center that just happens to be here in downtown Las Vegas. So as far as the gameplay goes, this mode again is definitely the weakest. But even outside of all the cars handling like a shopping trolley with its wheels doused in cat shit, just look at it. Like compared to how detailed those visuals were in the first game. And then remember that this thing came out 4 years after that. They're all set at night time too, which is a classic trick that a bunch of PS1 games used to do to hide the fact that their draw distance was shorter than a bee's dick. Maybe you can overlook the bad driving controls in the first game, but by this point, I don't really think they had an excuse. We'd had so many good racing games on the PS1 by then, games like Ridge Racer Type 4, the Wipeout series, and Gran Turismo 1 and 2. There was even a racing game on the Nintendo 64 around that time called Cruisin' Exotica, and although that game was a piece of shit, it did have a Las Vegas track which just shows how different two games can be with the same backdrop. I mean, compare both versions, right? In terms of the speed and the visuals, on the 64 it's far more vibrant and exciting. In Die Hard it's like you're driving a pea-stained cardboard box. This right here is what mid-2000s internet culture would refer to as an epic fail. Assuming you make it past this, in which case, bravo, there's another on-rails section, followed by some more third-person shooting sections. And this really started to make me wonder if anyone had even bothered to test out these levels before they shipped the game. And what was it that killed me that time? Oh yeah, great, proximity mines. Yeah, real smart idea, man, to put those tiny ass things in a game that's got a resolution of 240p. Fucking good one. You know what also annoys me? It's how enemies barely react when you shoot them. They just kind of stand there and take the hits. And medkits are so few and far between here that you almost need to get through combat without taking any damage. The thing that also pisses me off is how almost every single enemy is running around with a shotgun or an MP5, but they rarely ever drop any spare ammo for the player. Yeah, look at this. Look how much blood comes out of McClane when he dies. It's like I'm playing Manhunt all of a sudden.
Ah, it burns! Ah!
The music throughout almost all of this is always these 4 or 5 second loops that just play over and over. In fact, I'd struggle to call it music. And is it me too, or does the song in this level kind of sound like it's ripping off Prodigy's Firestarter? But the worst bit by far in the entire game is a level where you've got to escape the Hoover Dam in a very strict time limit. And this is just so insanely specific that if you make a single mistake at any point, well, you're basically dead.
Oh, fuck.
Right, so to begin with, you need to beat another truck through this door before it closes, which is tricky enough as it is. And then after that, you've got to navigate through this incredibly complex series of tunnels, collecting time pickups for those few pivotal extra seconds, along with nitrous boost to keep your vehicle moving at a high enough speed. But then, assuming you make it through all of that, for the final part of this, you need to outrun another truck, and this is where I simply couldn't progress. Because time and time again, this thing just magically pulled out away from me and left me to eat its pixelated dust. And you know what makes the whole thing even worse? Is all these idiots driving around on carts that keep getting in your way. Like, what are they doing?
Get out of the way!
I mean, it's like no one told them the dam's about to be vaporized.
Move!
All I can say is, thank God for level skip cheats.
I can't believe you've done this.
Although, truth be told, it doesn't really get any better after that. But at least finally you've made it to Vegas and can enjoy that low polygonal backdrop of the city that never sleeps. Just a shame the last few levels again feel unfinished and unrefined. There's so many enemies in these later levels with jackhammer shotguns and MP5s who shred through you in seconds. And there's just nowhere near enough health or ammo to compensate for that. And you can't even memorize their locations either because the game seems to randomly spawn them in. Often as soon as you turn your back, another one's just appeared out of nowhere. Overall, this is easily the worst game in this entire video, and the only solace I have about owning a copy of this is that I saved someone else from having to own it.
Thanks, man! Don't kill me!
The game ends when John finally catches up to and kills Kenny.
Killed Kenny! You bastard!
And admittedly, seeing someone crash into the roof of a sports car and get turned into paste is pretty entertaining. But not worth sitting through the previous 4 hours of torture, not by a long shot. Kids these days will never know how awesome the early 2000s was for first-person shooters, and it felt like every month or so some new title dropped that just totally reinvented the genre and seemed to put a fresh spin on things. Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza, though, was not one of those games.
Your husband? What does he think he's doing?
His job.
Now, this was developed by Piranha Games and is a pretty faithful recreation of the movie in video game format, and on a positive note, it does do a good job of recreating the loose plot of the film, involving John McClane being the only one capable of stopping Hans Gruber and his band of terrorists from their heist on the Nakatomi Corporation's vault.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
You get the opening titles as John's plane lands in LA, checking into the Nakatomi Plaza building, meeting Joe Takagi, even down to bursting in on Ellis doing lines of blow on Holly's desk. It's all there.
Ellis is in charge of international development.
Ellis is in charge of international development.
It's just that all of this is kinda crappy with really bad voice acting, stiff character models, and basic animations.
You want a breath mint?
Really came out about 5 or 6 years before game engines were at the point where this thing might have still held up. So as a result, you've got these weird, wooden, artificial cutscenes that are laughable at best. More so when you compare them to the scenes from the film.
Lose the grid, or you'll lose your job.
Lose the grid, or you'll lose your job.
I don't know it, I'm telling you. Get on a jet to Tokyo and ask the chairman. You're just going to have to kill me.
Get on the jet to Tokyo and ask the chairman. I'm telling you, you're just gonna have to kill me.
Hey, John boy.
Hey, John boy.
The dialogue's often delivered in a completely different tone to the movie as well, changing the mood of those scenes entirely. Like when John first sees Holly again, their interactions got a whole different energy.
Hi, honey.
In the movie, you could really tell their marriage was on the rocks and they were almost being polite to each other for the sake of everyone else in the room. In the game though, they just talk as if nothing's wrong.
Hi, honey.
The scene when Hans is explaining to the whole company what's going on is now completely deadpan, and when he's interrogating Takagi, the guy doing Takagi's voice sounds like he hasn't got a care in the world.
You want money? What kind of terrorists are you?
You know, despite the fact a psychopath is sitting across from him brandishing a pistol.
Okay.
The only person who sounds like he's really given it a go is Reggie Johnson, who's back to voice Pow.
I'm under automatic rifle fire in Nakatomi. I need backup assistance now! Now, goddammit, now!
I mean, it's not as good as his performance in the film, obviously, but you can genuinely tell that this guy's putting an effort in.
8 Lincoln 30 to dispatch. I'm on my way.
The guy again doing McClane sounds like he's doing a bad impression.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
And as for the rest of them, well, I'd be surprised if the guy doing Gruber's voice is even a voice actor to begin with.
You have 2 hours to comply.
We did 20 takes, and that was the best one.
Now, there is definitely value to be had here playing through some of those more memorable scenes from the movie, along with hearing those iconic lines in real time as a result of your own actions.
No kidding, lady, do I sound like I'm ordering a pizza?
The thing is that some of these sequences kind of assume that you've seen the movie. Like early on when John gets into that shootout with Tony, after he's killed him, you'll know that McClane then tries to salvage the guy's shoes, if you've seen the movie. So if you interact with this guy's shoes in the game, it ends the level, ending with John commenting again on how small these guys' feet are.
9 million terrorists in the world and I gotta kill one with feet smaller than my sister.
Before that iconic shot of Tony's corpse in the elevator with that infamous message scrawled across his chest. But if you haven't seen the movie, well, you're probably going to be wandering around that first area aimlessly until you figure it out. Later on, when you're on top of the rooftop being shot at by the FBI, fans of the movie again are going to know to look out for the fire hose and then jump off the edge of the building. But to someone who's never seen the film, jumping off a building is the last thing you'd think to do. But then what I find really weird is how they chose to hide Hans's face for almost the entire game. Seems the reason they've done this is so when you get to that bit where John first meets him, you know, when Hans is pretending to be Bill Clay, that there's going to be a bit of a twist there. Only that wasn't really the point of that original scene.
Clay. Bill Clay.
In the movie, I think it was more about the audience knowing and John not knowing, and then waiting to see how long it took him to figure the whole thing out.
No bullets. You think I'm fucking stupid, Hans?
So yeah, again, if you've seen the movie, well, hiding his face the entire time is just completely pointless.
Probably seems kinda stupid to you.
And it just kinda seems like they couldn't tell what demographic they were really trying to aim for.
Come with me if you want to stay alive.
Still though, that really is one of the only reasons to play this game, man, seeing how they've tried to recreate all of these scenes. Like the bit when the SWAT first attacked the building, right down to that one-liner, which, you know, 30-something years later still doesn't make any sense.
Oh my god, and the quarterback is toast!
Oh my god, the quarterback is toast!
What did he say?
Even down to that whole scene of a coked up Ellis trying to bargain with John over the radio.
Hey, what am I, a method actor? Hans, babe, put away the gun.
I think it's a neat touch too, how John holds weapons with his left hand, which is actually accurate to the film. And Bruce Willis, who's a lefty in real life. He even wears his watch on the inside of his wrist, which is something that Bruce does in the movies. But obviously it'd be pretty boring and short if all you did was play a recreation of the film, you know, considering how John barely killed a dozen people in that entire ordeal. So what they've tried to do is add in a bunch of new sequences to pad things out, like a whole level where you've got to protect Argyle in the garage while a bunch of terrorists are shooting at him. This guy drives like a total asshole, by the way, crashing into everything. I mean, how this guy got his chauffeur license is anyone's guess.
This crap happened to you when you were in New York?
There's one mission you've got to protect a hostage while you take out nearby enemies. Later on, you'll have to escort an architect to a floor that's on fire, using an extinguisher to clear the path ahead. And then an entirely new level set on an R&D floor of the building, which looks like an entirely different game. The scene in the movie when the FBI guys cut the power is still here, but compared to the movie where that lasted all of 5 seconds, in the game there's now multiple levels where you're walking around in the dark, with a Zippo lighter as your only light source. Moving through these barely lit environments, getting in gunfights with a terrorist who can apparently see in the dark, because despite it being darker than the inside of a chimney sweep's butthole, they can still see and shoot at you with ease. Just a bit of a shame there's so little variety to the combat, and you'll spend 99% of the time just shooting the same looking 2 or 3 bad guys with an MP5. Mostly because that's the only gun you're ever going to have ammo for. The inclusion of a lean button does add a bit of strategy to the shooting, because you can get gunned down pretty quickly if you just run out into the open, but it's really not very challenging stuff, and outside of a few sequences where they give you bugger all healing items, it's not that tough to get through. The more memorable terrorists from the movie are in the game as sort of mini-bosses, most notably Tony and Carl.
You killed my only family.
Sadly, they left out that one guy from the movie who John shot so hard that it caused his hair to instantly turn into a wig. Most of them though are just the same couple of enemy character models copy-pasted over and over ad nauseum. Occasionally you'll get some ammo for the Steyr AUG. There's also an M16 rifle that the SWAT guys carry, but that uses the same ammo as the Steyr. And I think in the game there's a grand total of maybe 3 or 4 M60 machine guns that you can find as well. John's also got his Beretta as a sidearm, but there's not really any reason to use this thing over the MP5, and the handful of flashbangs you get given don't really serve a consistently useful purpose. It does have its moments though, and I think that glass shattering effect actually looks really cool. Which is doubly important considering how much of a pivotal story device glass was in the movie.
Shoot the glass.
Yeah, not a good movie for people with a foot fetish, let's put it that way. There's even the whole shootout in the computer room where John's feet get cut up, and then the level after that, you're limping around trying to find bandages while your health is constantly dropping. Other gameplay mechanics include a couple of bits where you need to defuse bombs or cut wires inside circuit boxes, but yeah, that's about it.
Bingo.
What's not helping either is the sound effects and the music, both of which are just awful. Michael Carmen, the absolute lad who did the score for the movie, really helped elevate some of those action scenes and make them truly compelling and memorable. With the music in the game though, it's like they didn't even bother trying to recapture that same kind of energy, and it all just sounds like crappy MIDI music, which is odd too because the composer is the same guy who did the No One Lives Forever games, and the music in those games was fucking great.
Stop it. Get some help.
I think the final nail in this generic forgettable coffin is how it's just a really busted ass game now. It comes from an era where technical support, mods, or even an active community is practically not existent unless the game was popular, which, you know, Nakatomi Plaza wasn't. To put things into perspective, the whole thing is literally unplayable if you don't cap the frame rate to 60. It also needs an input fix so your mouse doesn't move around like you've got a ferret inside it. And while you can run the game in 16:9, it does mess up the aspect ratio, making 4:3 pretty much essential. Not to mention, it also has like a game-breaking visual glitch, which for me made swimming underwater impossible, forcing me to no-clip through a level just to progress. Though on the plus side though, it didn't crash, not even once. So yeah, I mean, it's got that going for it.
Tell that to Takagi.
But I feel like that's putting candy sprinkles on a shit sundae, do you know what I mean? It's not exactly improving things, is it?
Think, damn it, think!
Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza is not a forgotten gem or some kind of hidden masterpiece desperate for a remaster, and there's a reason why people don't talk about it that often, you know, assuming they know about it in the first place. And outside of the limited enjoyment you'll get from recreating the scenes from the movie, you'll likely have more fun recreating the contents of your last meal, as you project it into the porcelain bowl of a toilet after suffering from food poisoning. Was that too far? And that brings us on to the final game in the video, Die Hard Vendetta, developed by Bits Games, responsible for such classics as Last Action Hero and Terminator 2 on the Sega Genesis. That was sarcasm, by the way, both those games fucking suck.
You're fucking dead!
Either way, John McClane is back and looking far too old for this shit. Involved in an incredibly stupid and nonsensical story about an ex-Hollywood actor named Frontier, shamed from the world of acting and now turned mercenary, who then steals a bunch of expensive paintings to finance the purchase of a missile or something.
I'll let you get away with that once. Just once.
One of the other villains is Hans Gruber's son, named Piet, and despite this game taking place shortly after the events in the third film, for some reason this guy looks as old as Hans does and sounds exactly like him. They try to pretend for a bit like this guy's not going to turn out to be the villain, like he's turned over a new leaf or something, and it might have actually been a fun red herring if he was innocent, but nah, he turns out to be the bad guy, and he kidnaps John's daughter as part of this larger plot.
What? No! What does it take to kill that man?
You even end up back at Nakatomi Plaza for the penultimate level, which is cool, I guess. But then Piet gets killed so unceremoniously that you've got to wonder why they even bothered to put him in the game in the first place.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
That's my girl.
As for the combat in this game, well, the best way to describe it is that it's just completely mindless. You're just again shooting the same looking enemies over and over, with one of the most generous lock-on systems I've seen in a shooter aside from Modern Warfare 2's controller aim assist. There's a tacked on bullet time mode, what the game calls hero time, where Ojojoy plays in the background, and John can then move and fire his weapons super quickly while everything else more or less freezes in place. But it's kind of useless because you can't use it sparingly. Once you activate it, regardless of how much you've got left, you've got to use the whole thing up in one turn. It's kind of like they tried to copy Max Payne, but they just failed. In fact, they've also got those very Max Payne inspired slow motion shots of bullets traveling towards enemies. And every now and then you get a slow motion shot of an enemy meeting their demise as well. Again, in mind-numbingly boring slow motion.
20 minutes later.
It's not a bad combat system, but it's just so consistently generic, and about the only highlight here is a flamethrower, which is so effective and brutal that I feel like I'm committing a war crime when I use it. Vendetta does start off pretty good at least, with an attack on the city art gallery, led by a group of criminals so smart that they decided to do a heist in broad daylight, while the event was also being broadcast on national television. Anyway, one of the cops on the scene is John's daughter, Lucy, and after John sees all of this unfolding from the comfort of his beer, fart, and semen-stained couch, he does what any good dad would do and rushes down to the gallery to help. And again, this must take place in an alternate universe because Lucy, despite being a child in the first movie, now looks like she's in her late 20s.
That's my girl.
Anyway, once outside the art gallery, John meets up with Powell, who's now promoted to captain.
I was just gonna wish you luck.
And then, in a flagrant disregard for proper police procedure, Powell lets McClane go in alone, where he then kills dozens of terrorists, rescuing hostages and Lucy in the process. Though sadly, the bad guys get away with the art.
This is just the start. What?
And can I just say here too how I hate how John is wearing a singlet the entire time, which I think just completely misses the point of that costume choice to begin with. I mean, in that first movie, John was only wearing a singlet because he got caught by the terrorists when he was changing his clothes. If Gruber had have taken over Nakatomi Plaza when McClane was taking a shit, well, then he might have spent the entire movie running around in his underpants. But he didn't because he only got caught with his shirt and his shoes off. So to make John walking around the entire game wearing that singlet, it just makes him look like a hobo. But it also doesn't make any sense and shows a complete misunderstanding of why he ever wore that thing to begin with. Still though, for an opening mission, this isn't too bad, giving you a pretty simple introduction to the way the combat works, and also kind of training that itchy trigger finger to take a break whenever hostages are in the line of fire.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine.
And then you get to the second mission set in downtown LA, which again at first appearance looks pretty awesome, only to suddenly fail one of the first objectives. So you load it up and you try for a second time, and then you fail again. And again. And this is something you're going to get used to seeing really quickly when you play this game. Just these constant game overs, as each level is full of these incredibly specific and often time-limited actions that the player has to perform. Most of which you're not even going to realise for the first time. Like the level after this set inside the Chinese theatre, you open the first door you see, you know, as any normal person would, only for this NPC to suddenly get killed by an explosion. Because, as it turns out, this door is trapped and has a trip mine across it, but how you're supposed to know that for the first time is anyone's guess. The worst part is when you've got to rescue hostages held at gunpoint by the enemies, because you've only got precious seconds to take out all the gunmen before these innocent people are then shot, causing a mission failure. Along with often escorting NPCs around who move as slowly as an arthritic grandmother who's got wonky knees. The best way to sum this campaign up is trial and error, staring at that mission fail text before restarting from scratch and trying to figure out what you did wrong, repeatedly. It's almost like every new room in Air is just like a mini puzzle where you have to figure out the solution, and that's fine, but the lack of checkpoints means you're replaying these 5 or 10 minute segments over and over every time you fail. The bit I hate the most is when the game wants you to sneak up behind and interrogate someone, which if done properly will cause all the other enemies to drop to their knees and surrender.
What the? Show's over, pal. Tell your men to drop their weapons.
But if you don't do it exactly the way the game wants you to and in the right order, well, just slap yourself in the balls and reload that checkpoint.
Whoa, hold on, homeboy.
Hard Vendetta is also the only time I think I've ever seen a game have an auto jump feature, where if you walk to the edge of something, John's gonna jump off it automatically. I think the idea here is that it's supposed to help you out during the platforming sections, and in that way, it either works brilliantly, flat out just doing all the work for you and making those sections completely challenge-free, or on the other hand, it's completely broken. Jumping when you don't want it to and causing ridiculous fall damage. I do think there are some genuinely clever puzzles though, like shooting out this giant fish tank so the runoff water fills up a pit to let you jump across it, or shooting out another fish tank so some poor sod that's inside it doesn't drown. You can also shoot a nitrogen oxide tank which causes the bad guy near it to turn into solid ice, and that's kinda cool.
Hasta la vista, baby.
We did 20 ticks, and that was the best one.
And there are moments that are brimming with soul and humour.
You don't say.
Like going to the change rooms of a boutique in downtown LA and finding a woman hiding inside in her underwear.
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
But there's just no way around those numerous restarts you're going to suffer throughout the campaign and the constant frustration that comes from that, all coming from a game that just never makes it clear what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, I love the game over message. Try to stay alive. Yeah, thanks for the advice.
Thanks for the advice.
This is also an example of quantity over quality when it comes to the campaign, and the amount of locations and environments you move through just makes the narrative even more confusing. The worst level by far is John's escape from prison, which is just outright broken, and again makes me kind of think they didn't even bother to play test this before they sold it.
If you're looking for answers, you need to go somewhere else.
Right, so at this point in the game, McClane is sent to prison, all for shooting out the brakes of a trailer that's owned by a famous actress in a prior level, which, you know, somehow landed him in a maximum security prison. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, I'm sure that'll be happening any minute now.
And to get out, he first has to sneak up behind and disarm 2 guards on the top and the middle floor.
Just relax and I won't hurt you.
What?
After that, you need to find a pack of cigarettes and give them to an inmate in one of the cells who then lets you hang on to a single lit cigarette for yourself, which you're then supposed to use to start a fire in another cell on a mattress that's apparently covered in highly flammable human shit. Then you rush out and hide on the far stairs, not the closest ones, because the guard coming to put the fire out is going to use them to get to the 2nd floor. At which point, you then got to rush back to his office and hide in the locker behind his desk. At this point, you'd think you'd close the locker door. Well, no, because for some reason, closing the locker causes this guy to glitch out, meaning he won't sit back at his desk and you can't proceed. So instead, you need to leave the locker open, and then for some reason it works. Yeah, to get past this sequence, you need to go against your better judgment and defy common sense.
Oh, this is a dumb idea, John.
And this all has to be done without messing up any of those steps.
I'm gonna have to leave you here for now.
You'll never get away with this.
See the point I'm trying to make here of how fucking dumb this game is? One sequence later on, I couldn't even get past at all, despite trying countless times. There's a mission later on where you've got to sneak onto a truck, and the only route is behind some crates to avoid a patrolling guard. And despite the tutorial mission teaching me that moving slowly and staying in stealth mode keeps me hidden, every single time I got near this guy, he'd detect me and I'd fail the mission.
You serious?
And look, man, life's too short to be wasting my afternoons trying to get past a broken section in a 20-year-old game. So I did what any sane person would do. I used a level select cheat and I skipped the fuck past it. Sue me.
Oh, this is a dumb idea, John.
But don't worry though, because they saved the worst for last, and for the final level, not only do you need to fight your way through a giant open parking lot, avoiding half a dozen guys armed with assault rifles, rocket turrets, and a chopper, but then also utilize a mechanic that hasn't popped up once in the game since the tutorial level.
This is a joke!
And I've never finished this game as a result of this, which is ironic, because the people who were trying to make this game clearly didn't finish developing it either. I feel like this thing might have been tolerable on the PC with better controls and the option to save scum through those crappier sections, but on the consoles, the Xbox in my case, it's a frustrating, unfulfilling experience. Yes. 2002 and 2003 were just far too good when it comes to releases for the FPS genre, and as a result, there's just no reason to check this one out. Not even the appeal of it being based off one of the most awesome action movie heroes of all time. But I don't want to end the video on a negative note, alright? So there is one more final game I want to at least mention, and that's a game that any kid who spent time in the arcades back in the 90s is sure to remember, and that's Die Hard Arcade. Originally called Dynamite Detective, they changed the title outside of Japan to Die Hard Arcade, with the main character Bruno now being called John. And obviously having a lot of physical similarities, including his choice of attire, not to mention that unfortunate receding hairline, which comes after most of us at one point or another. I speak from experience. This right here is a pretty damn awesome beat 'em up where you're infiltrating a corporate building to rescue the president's daughter from a terrorist group. And it starts off pretty simple with you just beating up a bunch of thugs with your bare hands, but then it quickly gets batshit insane. Soon you're shooting enemies with a missile launcher, you're dodging fire trucks and taking on spider bots before you even know it. There's also a bunch of quick time events where you give someone a drive-by knuckle or foot sandwich, and that is always entertaining. Watching McClane deck some poor asshole without even breaking stride.
Break yourself, fool!
It's definitely a bit clunky nowadays and also hard as balls, which, you know, is pretty normal for an arcade game. But it really felt like it was a staple of any self-respecting video game arcade back in the day, and its charm I think still shines through. It actually got remastered for the PS2 in 2006, but that version never made it out of Japan, which is a damn shame, because being able to punch your way through this ordeal at home with a buddy just would have been hilariously good fun. I think the fact this game is made in Japan also shows the reach and the popularity the Die Hard series has had worldwide. And although sadly like Bruce Willis, it would wane in its older years, the fact that it spans so many years and when it comes to the game, so many platforms, still makes it worthwhile to talk about and reminisce over. And you know what, as bad as some of these games might be, they're still better than Batman Forever.
Yippee-ki-yay!